Hi everyone, I'm sorry this is late. Been having some problems with the computer, it's crashing all the time, so I spent about 4 hours trying to get this up. Anyway, hopefully Mandy's back home now, so she might be able to do it. We're looking at 3 crucial questions today, folks, concerning Acts chapter 16. A wonderful chapter. I hope you're enjoying going along and studying Acts together. I think it has been really special this time around. Also want to thank Richard for what he's done with Live Church and how much better that looks, and also Ray for leading us in worship on Sunday morning. It was really special. Well guys, we're looking at 3 questions for Acts chapter 16, and they're going to be very relevant to the things that are going on today. Okay, so first things first, need to read Acts chapter 16 verses 1 to 3. Acts 16 verses 1 to 3. And we're continuing to look because it is relevant to what's going on today, and I think Christians need to know what the biblical definition of love is in terms of races, etc. So in Acts chapter 16 verses 1 to 3, we see that Paul picks up a mixed race young man, half Jew, half Greek, and he is basically perfect for the mission field. He has to have him circumcised so it doesn't cause any contentious issues, so that it's all about the gospel and not about something which pushes the gospel out of the road, a distraction. Okay, now then, something that I heard the other day that really spoke to me was, I heard somebody say the other day that, years ago, doctors were telling us that smoking was good for you. Now, of course, in retrospect, doctors, the first thing they ask you when you go to have a health check is, do you smoke? It's written on every fag packet, smoking is really, really bad for you. And this guy was saying, he's actually a Mancunian by the name of Carl Pilkington. Some of you may have heard of him. He says he believes that in the future, people are going to say that this barrage of news that we're having today in our society, instead of just news at dinner time and news at tea time, that we're just getting this constant flow of news coming our way all the time. He says that in the future it will be seen as something of a public warning, something that was really bad for you to listen to news continually. And I think he has got a point there. I think that if you listen constantly to news all the time, it can actually drive you mad, and that's what it's been like for the last year for people, and it's not actually good for your mental health either. One of the things that's come up again and again during this whole COVID crisis, of course, is the issue of race. We had the whole Black Lives Matter thing. We had the issue of somebody coming out with the phrase, well, all lives matter. And off the back of that, people were saying, I'm very offended by you saying all lives matters. And quite frankly, for the Christian, I'm not sure whether the Christian knows where they stand in this anymore. What do we say? And I think the answer is always in the Bible, which we'll look at in a minute. In fact, let me give you it's Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22, verses 35 to 40. That's what I want to look at as a blueprint for how we are to view people of any kind of race or whatever it is. Simply put, they ask Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? He tells them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. He says the second one is like it. In other words, it's intrinsically linked to it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. And he says, on these things hang all the law of the prophets. Very simple, isn't it? Very simple what Jesus says. Now then, let me give you another 2 illustrations of things that have happened recently, or to my father-in-law. Bless his cotton socks. Comes from Jamaica, came over in the 1960s. About 3 years ago, he came round to our house and he said to Mandy, he went somewhere, I can't remember where he went, but he was trying to ask somebody at these offices where such and such a person's office was. And he was trying to describe this person to them, so he said, he's a coloured brother. And the person in the office said to him, you cannot say that. You cannot say coloured brother. You have to say he's a black brother. So Mandy comes back, Leroy comes back to talk to Mandy, and he says, I don't know what to say anymore. He said, when I first came over to this country, you couldn't use the term black. You had to use the word coloured, and he says the whole thing swapped round again. He says, I can't keep up with it. But let me throw something else into the mix regarding race. So I went for my 21st birthday, I went to Lanzarote years ago. And I was on the beach in Lanzarote. I was in my trunks, and I'm walking along with I had to be the whitest person on that beach. I've got this, pinky, bluey white skin. That's me. And I'm walking along the beach. There's hundreds of people on that beach. And I walk past a wall with about 15 lads on it that were probably they were either Spanish or they were from Portugal, one or the other. And they're all, got that lovely colour skin. They've all got trunks on. I've got my trunks on, but I've got this like red bib around there where the sun has caught me on my chest, and everywhere else I was bluey whitey pink, but on this part I was bright red. So I looked a complete wally. And I'm walking along at the age of 21 thinking I'd rather be anywhere but on this beach, and I'm walking past these lads, about 15 of them on this wall, and I can see them starting to point at me and snigger. So I'm walking along and think, oh, they're obviously, they're laughing at me. And I thought, I can't go back, so I had to carry on walking past them. And then I began to hear them say in broken English, kind of laughing like hyenas in broken English, pointing to me and saying, bow down, bow down, bow down to us. Bow down to us, you see, that's what they were saying. I'm walking past and thinking, what on earth am I supposed to do in this scenario? So I just carried on walking, really embarrassed. Carried on, and it wasn't a nice feeling. I've got to admit, it was an awful feeling. Now I suppose in this day and age, I could have gone back there. Let's say this is 2021. I could have gone back there, and as I'm walking past these guys, Spanish guys or Portuguese or whatever they are, maybe I could have gone past them much closer and put my arm out, in a kind of a high five thing, but obviously that way because of COVID. And you walk past and you say, guys, don't worry, I identify as Spanish today. But my point is simply this: we are living in a scenario where there's many different types of racism. There's many different ways that people kind of hate one another for various reasons. You look at the Labour Party 2 or 3 years ago, was it that long ago, where there was a real problem. There was an anti-Semitic stink in the Labour Party, and it was allowed to go on. Why was it allowed? Are the Jews not included in this package? If you look at the gypsies, anybody that knows about the gypsies over this last 20, 30 years, particularly the Daily Mail, they were extremely cruel towards the gypsies. Do the gypsies not matter? How does this thing all work? Now, I believe that Jesus tells us how it all works perfectly in Matthew chapter 22. He says that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength, and we are to love our neighbour as ourselves. So here's the first question. The first question is very, very simple. How can you improve on that? Think about it, right? Because this whole thing is so confusing. Let me give you another example. When I was a kid, at school as a kid, we used to sing the song, Jesus loved the little children, all the children of the earth, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loved the little children of the world. So here we are today. Quite rightly, you can't call somebody yellow, right? Or you can't call somebody red and yellow, black and white. But it is completely acceptable to call somebody black or white. But the thing is, nobody is white. I've never met a white person that's completely white. Even me, and I'm as white as they come, I am not white. I'm pinky bluey white. And most black people are not black, are they? They are some kind of shade in between, you know, brown or whatever. So you can't call people red, you can't call them yellow, but it's perfectly acceptable to call people white or black. I don't understand the rules. My point is simply this. When Jesus said, love your neighbour as yourself, surely you can't reinvent the wheel, folks. How can you possibly improve on that? And my question is simply this. What is it about that that offends people that we can't just go back to that as the blueprint? What is it about that statement, love your neighbour as yourself, that we can't just go back to that, which is so much simpler than all this stuff we see today? Okay, that's question one. All right then, so question number two. So we're looking at Acts chapter 16. Acts chapter 16. And we are looking at verses 20 to 26. This is when the Apostle Paul and Silas are thrown, bring it here, are thrown into a prison. And they're thrown in and they're beaten with rods, and it's pretty horrific what happens to them. So, very quickly then, there's all kinds of different kinds of people that go to church. You could categorise them in this order. Let's start with the most immature, the most selfish, and let's work towards the most mature. So the most immature kind of Christian that comes into church is the kind of person that they come in and it's all about them. They're really not that bothered about God or people, neither, you know. They go to church. I'm not even sure if they know why they go to church, but they go to church. Every church has in some way people that are very immature in that way. When the hard times come, as they almost do to every Christian, when the hard times come, these kind of people tend to blame both God and people, right? And it's a question as to whether they've really got a relationship with the Lord. Let's move on to the second category of people. There are people that love God and they'll let you know that they love God, but they haven't really got much love for people. And what happens is when the hard times come, as hard times always come, we might not end up in a prison being beaten by rods, but hard times come. What generally happens with these people, they can't blame God because they claim to have a real love for God, but they certainly can blame people, and they do. Then there's a third kind of a person. This third kind of person is the kind of person that loves God, and when they end up in a hard position in their life, they have the capacity to actually think, do you know what, Lord, maybe you've put me in this position for a reason. What is it that you're trying to show me? That's the third kind of person. The fourth kind of person are as rare as hen's teeth. They really are. And this kind of person is the kind of person that loves God and actually loves their neighbour as themselves. Just the way that Jesus commanded us to be. Very, very rare. These kind of people, when they find themselves in a prison, in a bad situation, they'd like Paul and Silas, they have the capacity to worship God, even in a scenario like that. They have the capacity to even say, Lord, this has happened for a reason, and I just need to find out the reason. They are amazing people. They're the salt of the earth. They are the SAS of the Christian world, those that love God with all the heart, and they love the neighbours yourself. They're amazing. But they can even go a step further than that. They can even stand in the gap for others that are in prison when they themselves have got a good life. They can feel, they feel compassion for those that are like Adnan that we looked at on Sunday morning and his precious family. They have the ability to say, Lord, even though my life is good, I am going to worship you, I'm going to pray to you, I'm going to stand in the gap for these people. That's those kind of Christians are the salt of the earth. And this world, this whole world, is a much better place for people like that. So my second question is this. Last week we looked at burdens and how God puts burdens on people. My question is, should every Christian, according to the New Testament, should every Christian really have a burden to pray for those that are in a worse predicament than themselves? Should they? Should every Christian have that burden? And why is it that so few actually do? Last one then, Acts chapter 16, 35 to 39. Paul uses the fact that he is a Roman citizen to basically tell off the authorities that have put him in that prison. And he's going to use that again later on. The fact is, Paul uses the Roman roads, Paul uses the letter system, which was absolutely brilliant, and he uses the fact that he's a Roman citizen. Paul uses all available methods that he has at his disposal to get the gospel across. Of course he does. So, the last question is, and this has come about through the Zoom meeting that we had on Saturday, and it's really made me think. So the Apostle Paul used everything that it was within his disposal to actually get the gospel across. Even when you look at the time of the Reformation, you got the printing press that had been constructed at that time, and they used that to get the word of God across Europe. Now, in the third industrial revolution, which is the microprocessor began that from the 1980s, and Moore's law tells us that every 18 months the processor speed doubles every 18 months, and so we've ended up in where we are now. We began with these kind of VIC-20s, Commodore 64s, Sinclair ZX Spectrums, these really old antiquated computers that could just about bounce a ball around a screen, to where we are now. In a space of 40 years, these computers that we have that are just absolutely incredible. Then we ended up with something called the internet. Most of us at the start of this kind of wonder whether it will ever really catch on. Then you got something called Ask Jeeves. Remember that? It was a search engine which wasn't that good. You will ultimately end up with things like this. Smartphones, unreal, where I can actually just ask a question like this, what is Einstein's theory of relativity, and it will tell me straight away. This thing will navigate me off a mountain in a blizzard. This thing can contain unbelievable amounts of data and information. There's not a lot that these things can't do. They are stupendously amazing. You've got computers now which can do things that are just, my point is, I don't think we quite understand what we've got, what we have available for us today. And I wonder what people in the past would think about what we have available today in terms of the ways that we could communicate. Take John Wesley, for example. John Wesley says, the entire world is my pulpit. And he went about on horseback in all manner of ways. I think he covered 250,000 miles on horseback. And my last question is this. Think about Zoom and what you can do with Zoom. How people can come together from all over the world and talk together. Sorry about that. The last question is simply this. In the light of what we've learned about the Apostle Paul so far, what would Paul do with the technology that we have available to us today? If Paul lived now, what would he do with that technology in terms of the furtherance of the gospel? Okay, folks, have a lovely time on Zoom. God bless.